it seems like there are a lot of critics of Christianity these days. Now, it could be because who I am and what I do, I'm a little more sensitive to it, but it doesn't seem reasonable that there's so much attacking the Christian faith, and I don't see anything going on against the Muslim faith or the Hindu faith, and I just am confused about that. But the people who are critiquing Christianity, some critics are even denying that Jesus historically existed. But others take on like conspiracy theories, like the apostles at the very beginning were clever enough and saw in the future that this church could be something powerful and something making money, and therefore they came up with these schemes. They stole the body of Jesus and they just pretended they just want to go on. Now, reality kind of smacks you in the face with those theories. I mean, they risked their lives. They were willing to be tortured. All 11 apostles, except for John the Evangelist, were brutally killed, martyred for the faith. You'd have to really have a strong conviction in order to do that. Furthermore, what really kind of cracks me up is these, and especially you see this on the History Channel. History Channel used to be my favorite TV show because I love history, and then they started doing more and more programs on religion and attacking religion and bringing people that were so-called experts who are just on the fringe of academia and bringing them in, and they talk so eloquently. It's like, you know, you foolish people, you believe this, but this is really the case. I stopped watching it altogether. Because here's the funny thing. The first people who came up with conspiracy theories, the first people who denied the resurrection, the first people who resisted the truth that Jesus Christ rose from the dead were his disciples. Now think about this. Mary goes to the tomb, right? We're all familiar with that scene. What's the first thing she thinks of when she gets to the tomb? Who took his body? Where did you hide it? It wasn't, oh my God, the things that Jesus told us have become a reality. It was somebody must have stolen his body. And when the women come back and tell the other disciples what took place, do they believe him? No, they dismiss him as foolish, emotional women. They just dismiss the whole thing. And then the two guys walk into Emmaus. It's about a 6-hour journey on foot. They walk to Emmaus and they're with this stranger, and he's got all this good insight into Scripture. And then when he breaks the bread, they realize, oh my gosh, it's Jesus. They walk with him. They were his disciples who lived with him for 3 years, but they didn't recognize him. He breaks the bread, and oh, their eyes are open. And what do? They turn right around and go back 6 more hours to get to Jerusalem to tell the disciples, who once again are not so willing to believe them. And Thomas, Jesus comes and stands, and the other disciples, the 10 disciples, the Lord was here. He was here. We really saw him. Thomas said, I'm not going to believe that unless I see it with my own eyes. So the first people who said the resurrection was not possible were the very people that Jesus picked, trained, and empowered to spread the gospel. To think that these simple men were so clever, and they had such great PR, and they had such great foresight that they would envision a religion that would spread throughout the world is ludicrous. But what made the difference? How did they go from disbelief to belief? How did they go from the gloom of Good Friday to the joy of the resurrection? Well, actually, it took Jesus all day long to convince them. It took him all day long to convince them. But what was the difference? They experienced him. They had an experience of Jesus. And the experience of Jesus changed them. It turned their world upside down. They simply could not reconcile. You know, I've recommended this film before, but if you haven't seen this film, please go home and look it up. It's called Risen. It's one of the most powerful films. It's a fictional story about a centurion who is tracing down the body of Jesus to prove that the body was stolen. And instead, he encounters Jesus. And he simply cannot reconcile what he knows to be true. He saw Jesus dead, and now standing in front of the same man, breathing and alive. And that's the same thing for the disciples. Let me ask you this question. If you knew someone, if you loved someone and they died, and you knew they were dead, there was no doubt, you were at their wake. You stood over their coffin. You went to the graveyard as they put the casket in the ground. You even threw dirt on the grave. And 2 days later, that person's sitting in your living room. That's an experience, yes? And that kind of experience will turn your world upside down. And it is that experience that these disciples had of the presence of Jesus and the physical presence of the Lord. And it changed everything. The critics of Christianity today, what's frustrating is that so many people are susceptible to their claims. I've had a couple people in the parish leave the church, not just Catholicism, but the church, because of what they've seen on the History Channel that disproved to them. And how could they be so susceptible? There's a couple things here, guys. And it's no new news that I'm sharing with you. I've shared it with you before. Most of us, the vast majority of us, are what they call cultural Christians, cultural Catholics. That is, because of our ethnic background, because we're Polish or German or Italian or Hispanic, there's a strong connection to the faith back to our grandparents, and that's been passed on. But in this country, as that cultural influence dwindles, people begin to lose their faith. And so for a cultural Christian, belonging to a church is like belonging to a club. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't change you, it doesn't challenge you to grow. It's something you participate in. You might even enjoy it. You have a feeling of belonging. It gives you a sense that you're doing something outside yourself, but it doesn't change you. A cultural, and the problem is, like so many of you who have adult children have told me how your children no longer go to church because the pressure of that cultural influence begins to dwindle. There's nothing substantial to hold people to the faith. And the other thing is people have intellectualized their faith. We've heard the stories, Scripture, the idea of the resurrection, all those things are in our head. We get it. We might be able to explain it to somebody, but it hasn't journeyed from here to here. I once told you the longest journey in life is from here to here. And when it doesn't get to here, it doesn't make that big of a difference. You might like the ethic of Christianity. You might like to live by the moral code of Christianity. You might see this as a value, but it hasn't changed you from within because the experience of Jesus is not there. That is why, when you look at all churches, all mainline churches, Pew Research has done this study over and over, declining, declining, declining. The only church that's kind of maintaining itself is evangelical churches. Why? Why? And why? For example, Faith Church and Living Stone Church. Why are more than half of their members former Roman Catholics? Do you ever ask yourself that? Why is that going on? Because they focus on the personal relationship with Jesus Christ. They focus on Scripture and that relationship. And when you have that experience of that relationship, again, it changes everything. And people are hungry for that, and they're looking for it in so many different ways. Well, here's our problem. If it was an experience of Jesus that changed the disciples, what about us? We can't go back 2,000 years, can we? and stand in that upper room? We can't be on the road to Emmaus as he breaks the bread. We can't be in the cemetery with Mary Magdalene as she sees Christ. What do we do? Well, my friends, we can't have that experience. But Jesus said to us before he ascended to heaven, I will be with you always to the end of time. And in our kitchens and in our garages, in our backyards, in our lives, we can still have an experience with Jesus Christ, an experience that will bring us to our knees, an experience that will turn our world upside down, an experience that will make us want to change and be better people. That's what the experience of Jesus does. And so if you are part of that cultural Christianity, cultural Catholicism, if you find you have all the facts up here, but none of the motivation here, then do what people have been doing for 2,000 years. Get on your knees and ask God to come into your life. Desire to have that experience. Pray to have that experience. Because only when people experience Jesus Christ does life change for them. Only when we experience Jesus Christ does Christianity take on a power that we've never could imagine before. And time again, over the years that we've been struggling to be disciples, to make disciples, slowly but surely people have had those experiences. And when they have those experiences, they come to me like, I don't know anything about it, because they're so excited. They're so overwhelmed. They're so in need of sharing this information. They become evangelists. But it doesn't happen unless you open your heart and ask the Lord to come in. And so, those of you who are club members, those of you who have got it up here, pray, plead, ask for the grace that it come into your heart, and that you become a Christian who's a disciple who makes disciples. Let the church say. Amen. Please stand.